my name is Mira Chang. I'm a producer, director, and I've been making unscripted content for about 20 years, which is kind of crazy. And I was VP of development at a company called Show of Force for the last 5 or 6 years, and right now I'm an independent producer. So this panel is really going to be focused more on pitching an unscripted series, whether it's a limited series or formatted series, and whatever works for you guys. We'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. And I will say there was another panel earlier about the development of documentary series versus a feature length. But some of those questions might come up in this one as well. So, so I think maybe each of us can go around and tell us a little bit about your background and also what you do and where you are right now.
Yeah.
You want to start?
Hi, my name is Adam Neuhaus. I help lead development for ESPN Films. It's primarily the 30 for 30 series, so features, shorts, and podcasts, but then in addition, helping lead development for ESPN Plus, which is the new streaming service from ESPN. And as I'm contractually obligated to say, tomorrow Disney Plus launches, and part of the bundle is ESPN Plus, and so there you go, I've said my piece. And so I think primarily today I'll be talking about ESPN Plus, where it's a live sports platform that has original programming, and that's where we kind of do most docuseries. And spent my whole career here in New York working for production companies. So I've had 1,000 no's of pitching shows in, so I can feel you, you know. And now I've had to say no 1,000 times on this side, so be able to bring that perspective.
I'm Fred Grinstein. I used to live in New York, but I just moved to Los Angeles. I work at Anonymous Content, which is a pretty unusual company. We're a production company, we're a management company, we're a commercial company. In some ways, it's this amazing sandbox that our founder, who passed away this year, Steve Golan, kind of created. That on the one hand, we represent about 700 of Hollywood's biggest writers and directors and actors. We've been producing films and television series for about 20 years, everything from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind to Babel to The Revenant and Spotlight on the film side, and also on the scripted television side. We kind of kicked a lot of this kind of golden age of TV off with True Detective and Mr. Robot, and most recently Dickinson on Apple. Obviously, none of that has anything to do with me, and I wish I could take credit for any of it. I mostly sit in our staff meetings and eat popcorn and think it's awesome. But basically, we're sort of going through an interesting phase of growth, coming in with some new injection of funding in our company, where we're expanding in new divisions, and we've kind of really doubled down on nonfiction. My predecessors and some of my colleagues, who, by the way, I work with like 50 other producers that are managers and producers, so there's a lot of stuff coming out of our building. But we did Flint Town for Netflix a little while ago. The Amazing Jonathan documentary on Hulu was one of my colleagues, Jacob Perlin, who represents Ben Berman, the director. And we did one of Amy Berg's more recent films, This Is Personal, which premiered at Sundance. And my background is I lived in New York for a long time. I came up in unscripted television, also made my way onto the network side. I was at A&E for about 4.5 years, and then at Viceland, actually kind of right before Gena got there. And basically, I sort of got to be on that side. I was part of the 10,000 no's that I always tried to tell people sometimes add up to a yes if you're listening and you have a good exec that's helping you. But now I'm back on the selling side, and in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do at Anonymous is really live up to the premium kind of content brand that I think we've been doing in scripted, and trying to bring that into feature documentaries and limited series and returning series.
Hi, I'm Gena Konstantinakos. I'm the VP of Original Programming and Development at Topic. Topic is fairly new. It started as a digital magazine in a studio about 3 years ago. The digital magazine created a wide variety of really genre agnostic and length agnostic content for the website, and we're now launching a streaming service on the 21st of this month. And we're launching with a combination of acquired works that are from, I would say, international acquired works, drama series, a bunch of documentaries, and we're in the process now of spinning up new original works as well. Topic is part of First Look Media, which houses The Intercept, Field of Vision, Obviously it's early days for us.
We actually have a trailer, right?
Yeah.
Can we play the topic sizzle? So can you talk a little bit for topic? So what kind of, in regards to documentary series or unscripted series, because the landscape has changed so much in terms of the outlets, what kinds of series are you looking for?
So topic, I would say we aspire to appeal to an audience that is really curious and really engaged and looking for something a little bit different. We're much smaller than a lot of our offering will be much smaller than a lot of the other streaming services that are out there and launching. And I would say that what we're going for in general across our programming, both when it comes to scripted and unscripted, is stuff that first and foremost is you're watching it because it's entertaining, but also really has something to say, and comes ideally from a creator with a strong point of view, and especially someone who's bringing a point of view that comes from outside the mainstream, and work that's really pushing the conversation forward in a certain way. And so I think partly because the topic's been up to for a while on the magazine side was short form. We are really sort of length agnostic in the way that we think about storytelling now. It could be short form series, long form series, whether it's scripted or unscripted, length is sort of less important to us. But because we're going from the open web space where some of the documentary programming, including short series, were really structured to be standalone because they could kind of float on the open web. Because we're now moving into the streaming environment, we really are looking for stories that have serial arcs that will carry you across from one episode to the next. So some of the things that we look for pretty consistently on inbound pitches is a really strong hook that communicates very quickly sort of what the stakes are emotionally and ideally societally. And then how is that hook, what's the connective tissue between the hook and the end? Like, what is the arc that's really carrying you across that sort of keeps you interested in watching through to the end? And then, what can you anticipate is going to be the conclusion? So sort of just the very traditional elements of like a well-crafted, well-told story, which you can't always predict in a documentary how those things are going to go. But when someone comes in and has been thoughtful about sort of structure in that traditional way, it's always very reassuring that it's not just a world and just interesting characters. Obviously, you want those things, but it's the structural elements of what you can anticipate will make someone want to go from like not just Act 1 to Act 2, but like from the first episode through to the last.
And it's interesting because there are different types of formats for documentary series. And so, Adam, can you talk a little bit about? I remember when 30 came out, and the whole doc world was like, oh my God, this is amazing, an umbrella series where you can actually have, your documentary films as part of it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And about the kinds of documentary content that ESPN is doing?
Yeah, so obviously 30 for 30 now is 10 years old. This year we've made over 100 features, 75 plus shorts, and now the podcast brand as well. We've made about 20 of those. So I think we've been most excited about taking the ethos of 30 for 30 and expanding it across the different things that we do. So the one thing we try to do at 30 for 30 for documentaries, we have kind of a clear lane. ESPN as a whole is a journalistic organization as well. So a lot of kind of current day stories that you might see pop up in the news are being covered by our news team. So in a lot of ways, we've taken the lane of historical and archive based, on the 30 for 30 side. So for us, a topic has really got to be at least 15 years in the past. So, okay, this great thing or interesting thing happened, but now a little bit of time and distance, we could see whether it's had a impact on society, whether it's gone beyond sport, into culture as a whole. So that time and distance is really important for us from a storytelling perspective, but also kind of just helpful for us in terms of clearing the lanes of all the millions of pitches that come in. But I would say we treat it like films. We actually don't even consider it a documentary series. We try to make all the films be director driven, and so that it's that person's film that also happens to be a 30 for 30. Want them all to look different, feel different, really come at it with an angle. And certainly, the kind of OJ Made in America is the kind of crystallization of that whole thing, which is Ezra's kind of vision of that, the time and distance to be able to look at it, and the kind of larger than life, impact on culture. So, it's interesting, like on the series side, we're looking actually for more verite. I'm actually not really looking for archival, historical series, because for ESPN Plus, we're trying to grow franchises. And by its nature, these things are closed-ended if they're historical. So for all those things, even if we have a multi-part Michael Vick project coming out, Oscar Pistorius, multi-part, all these things coming out, but we view them as films, even if they're at a length that you would not want to sit in the theater and watch them. We view them in that way. So I think instead, on the ESPN Plus side, the question's more about, how will this series draw subscribers to our new service, and how will this series dovetail with live sports rights that we have. So, we have a new series on ESPN Plus following the Memphis Tigers, the college basketball team for this season. And it's an interesting story, but it's also the fact that we have 20 plus games of the Memphis Tigers across our network, and that this will be programmed in conjunction where you might watch a live game, and then afterwards we'll serve you up this series, and you may dive in from that. So the consideration on the kind of doc series side, I think, is more about how it fits in the overall ESPN portfolio.
That's great. I mean, what's interesting about this panel, two things, is that A, these guys all know each other from at least one project, I'm not sure which one, but also this is really valuable because we've got people here that have been on both sides of the buying process. They both have pitched a lot, and they've also been on the commissioning side, which I have not been on, which I've always wondered about power. But so, Fred, in terms of like the years that you've been working, from producer to A&E to now anonymous content, how has the demand for documentary series changed?
It seems like it's a lot bigger, which I think should be good news for everybody. Look, I think it's almost like the types of doc series even, because I think like for a long time there was a pretty institutionally set up world of reality shows, formats, and in some ways each cable channel had their own sort of like family of types of shows that they would buy, and you and your agent would figure out kind of which place was our show land. I think now in this sort of streamer mania, or whatever you want to call it, that we're all into, like the rules are out the window, possibly for bad. Rules sometimes are good because it helps us focus opportunity cost and the way we're spending money on sizzles and stuff. But I think we're about to enter 2 years of kind of question marks and sort of red herrings. And I think even if you watch the life cycle of Netflix, I think they admirably created this huge business that I think a lot of us are benefiting from, of looking at something that used to be relegated to PBS or sort of a Sundance moment. And now there's a whole market of what started off as films, and then they saw the value investing in series. But I think you even saw them make mistakes along the way, and in some ways live in the bubble of whatever data was telling them to buy a smoke jumper show, which anybody at Discovery Channel would have told you was like a dead idea, and nobody watches it. So like in some ways, these sort of moments of enterprise are creating new types of decision makers, and frankly, new opportunities. And by the way, the company that sold that show to Smoke Jumper should be pretty excited that they sold that show. So in some ways, I think it's a kind of an age of chaos, and I think you almost need more focus to kind of make the most out of your investment of your time and energy. I think places like Anonymous are, I think, hopefully poised to navigate the chaos, in that I think there is an age of filmmaker-driven content in a way that I won't name bosses, but I had a boss at a cable network that would almost use a French accent to make fun of filmmakers, whenever somebody would speak that way in a pitch. Whereas like then my next job at Viceland with the boss that Gena and I had, I remember hearing Spike Jonze ask the question when we were talking about a TV show of like, well, who's the filmmaker? And I'm like, do you mean the producer? Like, what are you talking about? But I think we've moved into this era that the idea of somebody with a point of view actually matters to the viewer, not just sort of some, award circuit. So I think it's an exciting chaos. I think it's one that there's be a lot of sinking and swimming in, but I think, if you can sort of tap into those opportunities to work with really strong creatives or really strong IP, all different ways of saying exclusivity. I think that's something that we sort of talk a lot about at Anonymous, of how are you looking at a property or a show or an idea. Why does nobody else have this? Why does nobody else have a shot at pitching this? Why are you the only person that has a shot at it? And sometimes it's because Brett Morgan's attached to your project, and that's a pretty big deal to a buyer. Or you have a piece of IP that's really meaningful, and nobody can tell the inside story in the way that this journalist dug up. So I think it's creating a really exciting era. There's a lot of opportunity. It has ballooned in terms of the number of companies and people that are making shows that used to really live on like two places. And I think that's exciting for people in this room, I think.
So I love that idea of the exciting chaos, because that's where we are right now. And even on a level, maybe we're talking to people who maybe don't have access to like The Rock as an attachment or that level. Like, a lot of people think they have a great story and they think it should be a series. So they come in and talk to you about like, okay, I have an idea, I think it should be a 6-hour limited series. What's your first question?
I first go, why 6? Like, it's because these things, especially when we're talking about limited series, it's so like arbitrary, and like you're basically beholden to the buyer, and it's whatever Adam says. Actually, we've been finding better patterns making 3-parters. Like, that's happened at Netflix even in the last 2 years, that all of a sudden they were buying 10 episodes of Making a Murderer, and then all of a sudden they're like, maybe these are 2-parters. And it just depends on what in that case, what the algorithm says, but it's sort of what's working at the platform. So I think my first question is like, first of all, why is it definitely a series? Is it certainly a film? Maybe, but is it definitely something that has serial components? Like, are there characters you're coming back for? Is there a format? And then start backing into what your fallbacks are once you have a chance to sell it. Because if somebody wants to buy 20 episodes, go for it. But why pen yourself into 6? Or why assume your buyer definitely thinks it's 6? I mean, you have to put something on the piece of paper at some point, but I think your creative process, I'm just on one project that literally this happened, and that's why I'm a little like deja vu about it, that I'm like, why are we obsessing about 6? Why don't we just talk about whether or not there's characters in it?
One other thing that we've been thinking about recently is, even outside, I think, sort of documentary series and having serialized art, but we're also doing sort of more chat and discussion format shows, which fit into the broader umbrella of documentary programming. And I guess one of the first questions that we ask when evaluating an idea within that category is whether it's replicable. Like, does it have a satisfying format, and then can you really carry it all the way forward throughout a series and have it be satisfying in each one in the same way? We have a show with Maria Bamford where she talks with comedians about mental health, and it's just like, it's a very, very simple show, but there's something sort of lovely and a little bit loud about that concept, because it's taking on a traditionally thought of as sort of a taboo issue, and she's just puts the minis and sits on the couch, and it's really just creating a container for that conversation, and sort of thinking a lot about how comedy and mental health kind of interact. And every time she does it, even though the personality is involved for every person she brings in, it's a very specific concept, but every time she does it, it's sort of satisfying in a similar way. It's a very intimate conversation, and you can sort of rely on her to bring that point of view and that intimacy to those conversations. So in a series where the arcs are not serialized, is it something you can really replicate across multiple standalone episodes?
How long are those episodes?
20, well, they actually vary a little bit, but they're going to end up being between 22 and 30 minutes.
Because I think what you said earlier is the thing we're most excited about in ESPN Plus is not being tied to length, because it can be as long as it needs to be, and we talk a lot about that on the film side too. And OJ wasn't supposed to be 8 hours, and it started a certain length, and we always want it to be exactly how long it should be. But I think the most exciting thing for us at ESPN is that when a project comes in, per what Fred said, we have a lot of levers to pull, so we can say, look at a story and say, should this be a multi-part podcast? Should this be a short film? Should it be a feature? Should it be a multi-part feature? Should it be a series? Should it be a combination of all those things? And I think what you're finding is storytellers are more open to that, because even the people who haven't done some of those other mediums want to do those mediums. So while we started doing podcasts kind of exclusively with audio producers, now we're figuring out how to do them with teams that don't necessarily have all the audio experience, and figuring out how to, if it makes sense for the story, how to put those things together. So,
I mean, look at OJ, right? A story that everyone thought they knew, and then it turned into this Oscar-winning, incredible deep dive into a deeper layer and to contextualize America. When people come in and pitch you a series, Adam, what do they need to bring you? What do they need to know?
I mean, what Fred said, exclusivity, whatever that word is, it's basically like know your story inside and out. If I get a pitch where in 45 minutes of me on Google, I can get to 85% of what your pitch is, like that's just not enough, So, I think very simple things when you're bringing a pitch. Like one, if you're pitching the ESPN Plus, spend the $4.99 or the bundle of $12.99 tomorrow. But like get ESPN Plus and like watch the shows that exist on there, so you at least have a sense of like what we have bought, over the last 18 months. And then know your idea inside out and bring something to the table. So like if Brett Morgan comes in, he can sell me a show off a one-liner, because he's got the track record. But if you are a producer with a shorter track record, then over-index for it. I always appreciate producers who have a project they love and they kind of take 1,000 no's on their way because they believe in that project. I'd rather have that than somebody saying, well, are you looking for more college football stories or basketball stories? I'll go find one and come back, And it's like, I want you to be invested in what you're pitching if we're going to invest millions of dollars in you.
Be passionate about it.
But I think it's another way of saying, like, when we say 1,000 no's, it's the person you're pitching, their job is to say no. Like, they can't say yes to everything. They don't have an unlimited budget. So your job is to make them say yes. And I think everything you're saying in a pitch, everything in your deck, everything in your sizzle is a sales tool. As much as we want to believe that these are works of art and creative outputs, that's the thing we're trying to get to. But I say exclusivity because those are things you can sort of quickly wrap your head around. I think what Adam just said is like, yeah, our enemy is Wikipedia. Our enemy is social media. Like, it used to be a big deal to get a celebrity to have access to following them around with cameras. Now they shoot themselves all day long. It's not that big a deal to get access to people anymore. If your really thoughtful thesis about a doc idea can be pulled up on Wikipedia by the end of the meeting, it's a bad sign. They might love it because Brett Morgan's there to pitch it, and that's when we say that there's a component that you're in control of. But the better pitch is one that says, here's the untold story, here's the thing that nobody's talked about, or here's the angle. Like look at The Great Hack as an example on Netflix, which people have been talking about Cambridge Analytica forever. It is highly Googleable, but they had her. They had her in her pool, tweeting, like behaving like a normal person, and that created an opportunity for a buyer and a viewer that became impossible to say no to. And I think that's what it boils down to, is your job is to make Adam say yes. And you have to give him as many reasons as possible to say yes.
How important are those materials, though? Have you received a pitch where it's just someone shows up and...
Yeah, we say it's not in vogue, but I just want really strong paper. Like, I actually don't even, for a documentary especially, unless it is based off characters that we're going to be following for a series, then I want, to see those characters. But if it's a documentary, really, really good paper is fine for us. We don't necessarily need a fancy sizzle. We definitely don't need a fancy book that's put together. I think people way overestimate the shininess of your deck that you bring in versus knowing the story inside and out, so that the first 10 questions I ask you, you have anticipated those questions, you have a response to them, and you say, yeah, you would think that, but here's the real story, or whatever it is. But I would say, for ESPN, we get, again, it's just understanding where we are in the marketplace. Like, we see every sports pitch. So having access to a team or a player or a person, that's not a pitch. That's a step one for it. And I've tried to bring in a little of the reality TV background, where someone's like, we have access to this team. I'm like, great, show me the characters. Why are these interesting television besides we have access to this team? Because as Fred said, access has now become a word that's a gradient of gray. Where does the door close is something that we ask when it comes to access stuff. What room can't we go into, and let's work back from there, because typically when people are talking about access, they're talking about curated social media type access, where you're showing a certain type of thing to the world. So, and athletes.
What does that mean?
I just think athletes are filming themselves like crazy, and so we tell people a single athlete follow doc. It's incredibly difficult to sell to us. I think even when you look at the ones that have worked, the Tom Brady show on Facebook, I think it's a good show. But for me, the reason that show works is because you had Giselle. You had a second huge character who was really good on camera. So a lot of people think, oh, I've got this amazing athlete. What else do I need? I'm like, yeah, you need your second character, your third character, and those people, because one person can't really carry a series of any type.
So, Fred, have you ever gone into a room with a series and come out with it in a different format?
Yes.
Or vice versa?
And I think that's, this is where we're talking out of two sides of our mouth. On the one hand, you're supposed to have a strong point of view, and you're supposed to really know your show. You really got to be buttoned up. On the other hand, again, learn what these execs do. They don't get to really buy it in the room. Unless you're pitching Bob Iger at Disney, it's unlikely that the hundreds of people underneath him really have any power. And usually there's a bureaucratic structure. So just know that you're really pitching this person to then go into another room. So you're arming them with as much as possible. And an old boss of mine, Rob Chernow, his line was, give me the fever. So you're getting that person high, you're getting them contagious, you're getting them, whether it's your enthusiasm as a great pitcher, or maybe a tape that just lights it up when people just pop in the room, you don't even have to say anything, or maybe materials that sort of really get that buyer there. But the other thing they do is they know their brand, they know their market, they know their audience, they know the 7 other pitches that came in pitching Tom Brady that week, and they'll know, well, this is the thing that is different, and I really want to work with you. So if you actually get that moment, it shouldn't be off-putting. It shouldn't be how come you're telling me how to make that show? I mean, it might be off-putting if you're an artist and you want to do your own thing, but in the commerce of selling series, and I think that's it. To me, that is a big difference in series versus a film. I think in a film, you're really empowered to be the artist. As a series, you're asking for many millions of dollars, and if this is a successful show, it's a returning series. That's a huge investment for a company. They're going to be a partner to you, and if in that meeting they're like, well, I wonder if we do it this way, you should be ready for that, and maybe you've even done the magic trick where you already knew that's what they were going to say, and you make them the genius that came up with the idea, and then now they're bought into the idea. But I think you need to be flexible.
So there are a lot of magic tricks that we could unveil, right? I mean, you want to be prepared for any question that could come up. And to your point of you're asking people for millions of dollars on some of these projects, how prepared do you have to be? Say you're a first-time filmmaker, you don't have a proven track record. What do you need to bring to the table to be able to convey that this is something that you can do?
One of the things that I actually have 2 specific pieces of advice. One is, if you can sort of do your research and find a filmmaker who is maybe more experienced than you are, whether it's a producer or a director, who you think would have a genuine interest in the world that you're exploring in the series that you want to pitch, and see if you can bring that person in and get them involved in some official capacity, whether that's to be an additional EP or to join as a consulting producer. That can help a lot, both in terms of creating an organic network around the project, and also give you some legitimate advice, and then also sort of lend some legs and some credibility if you are earlier on in your career. And another thing is thinking about who to assemble as your panel of advisors, really create a strategic group of people who can help support the project, and that can be both people who are in the industry, but also people who have expertise in the specific world of the project. So, and that again can both help with increasing the network around a project, and also help lend some credibility, even if you're very early on in your career.
Because a lot of people, say you're even an established feature director, but you've only done features. What are some of the differences, or what are some of the things that you hope that the person pitching you understands about what it takes to execute, say, whether it's a 6-part limited series or a format 10-part series?
I mean, the main thing that comes to mind for me really is about what is keeping a person watching, and I know I mentioned that already, but it's sometimes the case that someone will come in with fantastic access and really interesting characters and a world that like you can kind of just drop into. But there's only so long you can spend, even in a really compelling world, before you really need something like a track to be on. And usually, if you look for it, not usually, but oftentimes, if you look for it, you can find that track. And sometimes it's as simple as like starting, like for example, if there's an election that happens to be taking place within the context of this world, but it's not solely the focus, you can start the beginning of Act 1 and Episode 1 with that as sort of your open bookend, and then close it, and sort of tease it along the way and close it out. So I think, and that's also to your point, Fred, about being flexible in pitch meetings, being open to exploring some of those things. If you don't have the answer yet, being open to some feedback to figure out how you might be able to rearrange the story elements that you do have access to, so that you can be really mindful and thoughtful about the suspense component that carries a viewer, especially in an environment where there's so many things you could watch. You really want something that just kind of keeps you in your seat, when that sort of the gravitational pull of like a storyline where you just have to find out what happens next, and making sure that that's sort of a continually thought about element of your storytelling is really important.
Because sometimes I'll hear pitches also for co-productions or whatever, and there's a great story, and for some reason it's pitched like it's one big film that should be a 6-part series, but production-wise and execution-wise, there's a lot more that goes into like a 6-part series or a limited series, and sometimes that people understand, really. And I'm talking about the millions of dollars and how to run production.
Yeah. I think to what Gena said, it's about assembling a team that has strengths where you're weak. So if you have a real honest assessment of where you are and the project that you have and what you're missing, and, as Fred said, I mean, these projects, they're a marathon, and your ego's gonna get crushed and then inflated and crushed, and it's just this long process, and so it's good to have good partners on the journey, right? They say if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I do think if you're honest with yourself, and whether it's advisors or a production company that's done it before, all those things can matter. A lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the scariest thing and if you're asking about filmmakers that make one-offs and are on a journey to series, the thing that should terrify you is look at a post-production grid. Like, that represents a bunch of people. There's a lot of things happening at once. It is literally a bunch of spinning plates. And you don't want to deal with that. You want to be creative. You want to focus on story. You want to focus on and that is what the strength in numbers and the metaphor that Adam just had, that's what you're looking for. And look, I think there's a business consideration that when you make something all by yourself and you build it up all by yourself, like, you'll get a bigger piece of the pie and there's a bigger financial upside to that. You might also burn through all your money dealing with how bad first season network notes are from networks, and how much most companies that are actually much more successful have those costs built into their margins, and they're better at sort of staying afloat as things get ugly. And frankly, they have the experience of seeing things get ugly before they get ugly. So I'm almost scaring people off from going at it alone. And look, get your first win, get that first credit, get that first award-winning show, and then go build your company if it's about a first-time person.
Because there is a big difference between, a one-off or a feature-length doc and being able to spin all those plates for, a limited series or an ongoing series. In terms of, like, the anthology series, like 30 for 30, can you talk more about the seed of where that started and where it's going to go, and then we could show the...
Yeah, sure. So it started 10 years ago as a brainchild between Bill Simmons, former ESPN journalist, and Connor Schell, who's now the head of all content at ESPN. And I think a lot of it was the time and place. Documentaries were kind of waiting to be disrupted at that time, and ESPN had kind of a structural advantage. A lot of people, and especially before I had this job, you would hear a lot, we'll do the 30 for 30 of medicine, or, of journalism. And, ESPN, we always joke at the ESPN Films team, like, we literally do not matter to the bottom line. We have live sports, which is a cheat code for all of television and all of content. And so they were able to say, we're going to make 30 of these, and make that type of investment at one big swing, and not need it to deliver a number per se to put the network on its back. So I think that gave it a huge in to start, and then it kind of terrifies me. It's like I was hired, and then 6 months later they won the Oscar for OJ, and so I was like, oh fuck, like now I'm screwed. Like what do I do? Take it from here. But the idea is the series is based on finding new talent, who have something to say. We want our films to look different and feel different. We're trying to push the boundaries of what a sports thing is. We, again, use those words: competition, athleticism, adventure. We did this summer 30 for 30 about the hot dog eating contest, which 3 people cry in the film. I mean, it's like a rivalry film that's also kind of gross and fascinating to watch. But again, like, it felt like it fit within the 30 for 30 mantra. So it had that time and distance and whatever. So we're just trying to, find big stories that need a big, juicy take on them, and then also just push the boundaries of what a sports thing could be.
Can we play the 30 for 30 trailer?
Just to say, for anyone who doesn't know, the 30 for 30 means, it was 30 films from the first 30 years of ESPN. And it was meant to be a limited edition series, and then now it's just kind of become part of the vernacular. There's, my favorite conversations is when somebody tells me about a 30 for 30, it's just not a project that we did at all. But, so I think that's a good sign, but, so we'll hold on to the title.
It's something like 140 for
Yeah.
30 years. I mean, there was a time that I remember when if you said you were making a documentary, it meant you were going to be broke for the next 3 years, 4 years, putting things on your credit card. But the world has changed quite a bit. Fred, can you talk about that?
I mean, I think like just people making good money. But I also think a lot of those people were at it, and I think that should be inspiring to people that have been toiling. I think Alex Gibney has built up an incredible business. Morgan Neville is doing amazing things. So I think, I think it's funny the way Adam's very transparent about the way the 30 for 30 films sit inside of their business. Like, it's the same thing as if you look at HBO, like they have what used to be the Sheila Nevins kind of circle of films and the team sheets that are still there. It isn't the core business. Like you look at the way these companies are set up, and I think now that we've entered in a place where subscriptions are more meaningful than Nielsen ratings, like critical buzz and sort of word of mouth from the right people and all those things that people say has a value, and it drives subscribers, and that now that that amazing doc series doesn't have to drive the same ratings as Survivor, that creates a different economy. And like now you have like what Lisa Nishimura is doing at Netflix, and I would assume that sort of model is being replicated across these new streamers, that you sort of now have these different swim lanes, and there's a place where this doesn't have to be commerce, that can be art. And I think it can be art that has commercial instincts, but I think it's an exciting time. And again, it used to be a public broadcasting thing that there's no shame in that, by the way. It just felt small and it felt limited. It didn't feel like people would talk about your show the way that a network marketing budget could help.
Hey, Mira, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How do you figure out, because there seems to be so many buyers now, and say you don't have access to an agent, how do you find out like where to pitch your project? That seems like a very difficult task.
Well, I do get the agency updates, but I watch a lot of content. I mean, I watch, I look for what I want. I actually watch stuff, channels that I might not like very much. I try and really understand what the landscape is out there. And then I hone in on like, okay, I have a project that might be good for what I'm seeing on this specific channel. I mean, everyone thinks that they have a great series, and it could be a Netflix series, but it's really more about understanding where the film or the series could potentially go. And one of those questions then is, and I was just asked this before we started, was, do I need an agent? Do people need agents? Do you work with agents? Is that something that...
Please do.
Controversial topic.
I think agents can be very helpful in sort of getting your foot in the door and getting your project in front of somebody. I think also though, the non-traditional routes that have more to do with sort of individual networking and seeking out filmmakers who have done this before, seeking out producers and directors who can help you gain some traction, some momentum, and help connect the dots to the actual individual person is in some ways a little bit of a cut through. It can give you sort of sometimes you can get like a huge influx of pitches at one time, and I think if it can come in through a more personal route, sometimes that can be really helpful.
And the stuff that doesn't come in through the personal route, I mean, how many pitches are we talking about?
I think we went back and just on the film side, I think we serviced to this year to date about close to 900 pitches. And when we say that, that's not even just hearing the pitch. I think we try to pride the ESPN Films development team. We try to pride ourselves on doing the work. So if you pitch something in and you have a previous film, we will watch your previous film if we are interested. We will read the book that you're basing the pitch on. So we really try to go deep on that, but it is, again, just understanding the volume, and as Fred said earlier, understanding the position that we're in. I cannot greenlight something in the room, and yeah, you need to arm me to go make the fever pitch, to the bigger group of executives to get the money to do it. So it's a lot of pitches, but again, the goal is to get to yes.
The goal is to get to yes, and it's important being in the room. We were just talking about being in the room and arming the person with the right tools to pitch, but also how do you make yourself stand out? Or not yourself, but your project stand out, where you can, talk about your project in a way that they don't want to say no, or at least they want to go one step further.
Having something to say, having an angle, having a piece that nobody else has, all the things we talked about. I think that's, when you really think about it. Also, I'm so glad you said, watching a lot of content. Again, that's the thing that you can do. It does not require you having an agent or requires you getting the mandates. We don't even put out the mandate because we feel like it'll just be, 6 months we'll have something new and people are pitching based on that.
They say the same thing all the time.
Exactly. So, for us, if you have a sports thing, you want to see it. But I think, doing the work, I always tell people, are you reading Deadline? Are you reading Hollywood Reporter? If you go back and read a couple of months of that, you'll have a sense of what's being bought by the networks you're thinking about pitching to. And then watch the network. Okay, so I'm seeing these shows. Okay, I read about these shows being picked up. Now let me triangulate to think about my project and how it could work. So, the excuse of I'm not dialed into the industry, or I'm not, I don't buy it. I think if you have passion for your project and you do your homework, and if it's really compelling, you can find whether it's an EP to join your project or have a good sense to get to the right person to pitch it in.
But sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a moment.
But I agree. I don't think you should give up. You should keep finding the right team to keep pushing it forwards. That's what also shows in the room when you're explaining your pitch. You're passionate about it, you're smart about it, you've done your research and are able to express it to your best friend and to the executive in the room, then it has a little bit more of a chance.
I would say just also being able to be both passionate and concise in anticipating some of the questions that are inevitably going to be asked, and for topic in particular, just communicating what the hook is, what the arc is, and sort of the thought behind the structure of it being a satisfying story structurally is really important, and being able to sort of communicate that quickly, that there is a hook, there is a structure to this, it's important, these are the stakes, and a little bit of information about the characters who are driving that story forward, sort of leading with the ability to anticipate those questions is really helpful.
I was just going to say, also, you have to think of the pitch, if that's what you're asking about in the room. Look, it's a little show. You're almost auditioning what it's like for you to make the bigger show. And sometimes you have partners, sometimes there's talent involved, sometimes there's the filmmaker versus the producer. And like before every pitch we take out, like we have a pregame, we have a meeting the day before where we literally script it out. There's like talking points that we even throw out the script as soon as we've done it a few times, because it's just to make sure we all know what we want to say. Like you may have 30 minutes, you maybe have an hour, maybe you have a really engaged exec that cancels their next meeting because they're so into it, but you have a window of full attention. And I know that sounds like, why are these people so important? But that's their job. You're there to sort of get their attention and get them drunk on your idea when you leave the room. So I'd say there's nothing wrong with super preparing in advance with almost a script, and then put on a little show. Like we had a ridiculous show with this like women's sexuality expert. This isn't a documentary in a festival sense, it's a TV show. But look, she was very provocative. She was a lot of fun. Everything she said was gold, but you're the exec that walks in to take your pitch. You don't know what meeting they just walked out of. You don't know what annoying email they just had to respond. You don't know how angry their boss was at them about some bad cut. They're almost always in a bad mood when they walk in the door. So your job is to give them a break. And sometimes I even just ask people about how their kids are doing or something, like give people a break before we're going back to work. The host was really funny, and she basically had a lot to say about women's genitalia and even had scale models of it. And that's what we led with. And that was like the first moment right out of the gate. It was like 2 shots of espresso that woke everybody up, and then now we're in. And now the show has started, and now you've sort of plotted out how they're never going to forget the meeting you just set up for them.
I love that. Okay, so we're going to open it up to Q&A right now. I'm not sure how it's going to work because I'm blinded by the lights. So maybe Regina can help. Okay, great.
I was just curious, Adam, you mentioned that 900 pitches that you got. What percentage of those did you feel like were strong pitches?
Yeah, good question. Strong. 5%? I don't know. We're looking for 5 or 6 films a year, 2 short films a year, 2 big podcasts a year, and then maybe 4 or 5 series a year. So I'm just trying, and a lot of the things we've been working on for 2 years. So like right now I'm looking for projects for late 2021, slot 2022 even, So yeah, I'm on 5%. I mean, there's a lot of good ones, and sometimes there's just a reason, that we can't do something that the producer would have no idea that there's a reason we can't do it. So again, we try to be thorough, we try to be courteous, because we understand how hard it is, and then I think most importantly, we try to be decisive. So as I say, we try not to give any LA no's, as I talk about our brethren on the West Coast. But if we're gonna pass on something, we will tell you it's a no. We will send you an email that it's a no, and tell you to bring us the next thing. So, at the very least, we can provide clarity.
Hi. Thanks a lot. This has been great. Just wondering if you could just discuss the new trend of mini doc series and sort of, where your companies are going with that. You see sort of 12 to 18 minute segments.
The short answer for topic is we really are not worried about length at all. We're very agnostic when it comes to, it can be any length and any number of parts, as long as it's keeping you going from piece to piece. And I think that's one of the nice things about it, having started as a digital magazine. Everything was already very short form, and so now we're moving into doing longer form stuff as well. But for us, length really doesn't matter at all. And I think audiences, I don't know what you guys think, but I think audiences more and more are coming to expect a wide range of lengths with programming.
Yeah, we don't necessarily seek out we would just say, why isn't it not one film or what, So again, it just has to have a reason for being what it is.
Yeah.
On the podcast side, that's been interesting for us, and we've experimented with different lengths of episodes, and how long the whole series should be, because essentially you have like 5 hours, and it's how do you cut that up, and how do you make it a satisfying experience I think that's the thing that drives us the most, how will this deliver for the audience? So if it is 12 minutes, it's 12 minutes.
Is there space for development funding, or do you think there's more of a production funding kind of thing, like commissioning projects, or more of a
development money to move forward?
Yeah, like is
Okay.
there kind of a process of people being commissioned to kind of explore a project rather than kind of coming with it like
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So does one of you want to?
I mean, I think it's become very buyer specific, and I think in the limited space, it's almost becoming a new step in your process. I think Netflix for a long time, it kind of bummed a lot of people out that they wouldn't do a lot of development. In some ways, you'd get the big win of going straight to series, but they weren't piloting, they weren't doing these dev deals. In the cable days, that was kind of part and parcel.
I would also say, always good to have whenever I was pitching in shows, always good to have a couple of back pocket ideas just in case. Like, again, you might have this whole meeting set up and then a pitch comes in and for some reason, totally out of your control, they had just greenlit a cat show and you have a cat show, and you only have one cat show. So, it could end it very quickly. So I think having another one in your back pocket is at least useful. But I would say thinking about the time you have, thinking about good questions to ask the network executive.
Okay, one more. What are some good questions to ask the network executive?
I really think ask them how they're doing. like treat them like a person first. I don't know. I think like a lot of the buyers they just feel like they're just like ATM machines. So I do think it's important to try to build a rapport, and that's the reason why you're going out for drinks with that exec in the future, and you become friends with them, and then you have even better meetings with them because they're not so scheduled. So I think it's really important to build a rapport with people. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's just like doing your homework on the network and then having questions based off that. What's something that you didn't think was going to perform well that's performing really well? What's things like that, or like, hey, I watched all the stuff on ESPN Plus. Everything you're telling me makes sense, but this show seems to sit outside that. Why did this get greenlit? So again, I think it's an understanding of where you're going into pitch. And at least from the work you can do, which again can be watching the content, reading about the trades, and bringing that into the conversation.
And to that, I mean, it's a respect level also. I mean, someone's giving you your time to sit and listen to you and have a conversation. So if you come into the room and not knowing anything, not even have Googled, or can reference that, 10 years ago they did, on Amazon, I saw that there was something kind of similar, but this is totally different. Just enough research to be able to understand who you're speaking with. I mean, always Google the person.
And I would say, it's sort of a delicate balance of having a really strong point of view and a strong idea of exactly how it should go, but then also keeping an open mind, not being too stubborn. If someone has an idea that might help you shape it, particularly for that buyer or that network. Because sometimes a suggestion that might come from one buyer wouldn't have to or work well for someone else, but in that moment keeping an open mind about like where that suggestion is coming from and how that might help the project fit into the development slate in that environment.
I want to add one more. I think whoever's pitching in, you should have a reasonable idea of what your series or show costs, or at least a general idea. I think talking to a line producer beforehand, just at least having a general idea, and certainly you're going to try to get as much money as you can from the network, but I don't know, I feel like that can help, again, show how serious you are about the project, and whether it's, when I ask people, someone's pitching me a clearly historical archival film, but they haven't investigated the archival at all. It's like, come on. It's like, and again, like, if it's the right project, all these things can be, pushed under the table, but it's like, that I'm going to ask about archival, and so I want you to say, we've investigated all this stuff, we think we found another box in the basement, or this amount of money, or whatever it is. So I think just understanding how much you're going to need to produce your show, or getting an idea of that.
And to that point, if you come in fully prepared and researched, and you start that pitch off right, where you want to get to is that point of conversational kind of brainstorming, and that's where it gets really fun. Like, you walk in, you have this idea, it's well researched, you've covered all your bases, and you might walk out of there with like, wow, actually I didn't think it's actually a series, and they're all interested in it now, and really it was going to be a one-off. But you want to get to that level of knowing your project so well that you're able to engage someone into just the brainstorming.
I'd also add to that, like, if you kind of know you're going to pitch like 6 buyers, like let's say you have the type of project that has like a range, and whether you have an agent or whoever you think is like the ideal buyer, like do everything you can to put them last. A, like your pitch will be a lot sharper. Like A, like you'll have now done it 5 times, you'll have worked out all the kinks. You also will get these brainstorming moments in other pitches. You're like, that idea just got better. And by the time you get to the 6th pitch, you have the best version of your pitch because now it's been market tested by default. You know.
Yeah.
And then you could also say, oh, I was just at.
Yeah, exactly. No one wants to miss out on a pitch from someone else. Yeah.